The cup's over, the ships have sailed, and it's time for the big debrief. Going to look at this in several stages. First of all, in this episode, we're going to look at the AC75 class, and then we're going to come back to the format of the event and then discuss each of the individual teams, their pros and cons. Now, today's discussion is going to be about the AC75 class rule and the boat, what we thought was good, what we thought wasn't quite so good, and where maybe kind of improvements or new areas could be opened up. The AC75 was obviously a new class for the America's Cup this time round, a big departure from the foiling catamarans and big boats in the Deed of Gift and the IACC. So we haven't really seen anything like this on the Cup stage before, or in sailing on this scale. So a bold move for the America's Cup, a bold choice by Emirates Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa. How did it go? Was it good? Was it bad? Let's get the view of the boys. Got Tom Partington, Rob Gullan with me. Let's jump into it. Right, let's start off with some positives about this class. What do you think, Tom? Positives?
Like most people, when I first saw the concept, I thought this is they're barking. This is an absolutely mental concept to have a regatta in boats that look like that. It's going to be dangerous. How are they going to engage with each other? Like, you've got these foils flying out, hanging out the side of the boat to windward. I didn't see how it was going to end up being good racing. Let alone match racing. But as a class of boat, it's exciting to look at. They are the pinnacle of yachting, and that is kind of where the AC always wants to pitch itself. So I think that, from my perspective, I think it's been a great success.
How about you, Rob? What do you think? What's been the strength of the AC75, a positive to take away from it?
I mean, I think largely the fact that every single one of the sailors doesn't have a bad thing to say about them kind of says it all. When they first launched, people go, it's impossible, no one will ever be able to do it. And then a few years later, it's easy, everyone can sail them around the course. And the pioneers do the hard work effectively. And I think you'll see the next lot of teams potentially coming to the Cup who will just pick it up from a much higher level than these guys started at. So I don't think the boat's very off-putting anymore, and I can see that it'll be intriguing to more people to get involved. The boats are really cool. The cats beforehand were also really cool. So, I mean, from my point of view, I would probably accept a boat that was a little bit less cool if it meant that there were 10 teams involved. But ultimately, numbers on the start line with something that is at least 95% as good as this in terms of equipment would be better than fewer teams on the start line and a marginally better boat.
From my perspective, I think the biggest takeaway from this, the biggest kind of positive, was that for the first time in a long while we seem to have consensus that a class is good for the Cup and people want to keep it. Going into the event, I think Ineos were wishy-washy but then came round to it. Obviously Luna Rossa and Emirates Team New Zealand designed the boat, so they were kind of pro it. We don't know long term whether Luna Rossa were bought in, but they seem to be from what we're hearing. And the people hardest to win over, American Magic, put out a press release which had quite kind of positive reflections towards the AC75 class, which I wasn't kind of expecting from them. They've been on the record before saying they want to go back to a traditional class, but they said they did call it a remarkable class, which isn't really a kind of a pro or a negative. Things can be remarkably bad as well, I guess, but they did say they wanted the continuity. So I think that's the first thing that's been really positive. The other thing is, I was a huge doubter of it as a not once they were foiling but getting up foiling. I thought that was going to be a big issue, and they were going to be lacking righting moment before they lifted the hull out the water, and we'd see kind of like, you know, mid-range races, you know, below 10 knots really struggle to actually get racing in. But that's not been the case, and they've totally proved me wrong there. They've been also quite robust. I think that's another thing. American Magic obviously managed to smash theirs up a little bit, but there's not many America's Cup that go by without some sort of significant failure. These are race boats built to the edge. So I think there are some really kind of positives around the class, and I think it produced good racing as well. The wind conditions weren't always perfect, but the racing I thought was as good as you could expect from the course and the conditions.
I mean, they're certainly a lot more refined than the Catamarans were. Whether the racing is better than the Cats, it is kind of neither here nor there. And I do agree that the America's Cup kind of should be the forefront of inshore racing technology.
Yeah, it's always hard to tell going back to the Catamarans. Obviously, these were a step ahead of the Cats, but you never know where the Cats would have got to if they'd been brought on another cycle. And there was a huge gain to be made in the Cats if they'd gone to flaps on their boards as well. Then that would have made a huge difference. They were very limited by the way they were adjusting the boards. What do you think about the kind of change to more open design parts? 'Cause that's the other big aspect that's changed. The boats this time are visibly very different, whereas the Cats were basically looked identical except the paint job. Has that been a positive or has that been a negative?
I mean, we wouldn't have anything to talk about if they kept them all the same. So, for me, yeah, I think I like it, them being able to have their own design departments and be creative with their solutions, trying to work out and solve the problems. I mean, being an engineer, that's part of the fun for me, and I can see why they would do it, to keep costs low and supply parts. And I actually think that some of the rules in place currently with the arms being supplied, I think that's a good thing. I think you limit teams taking risks, and you probably increase the reliability of the boats, because those most highly loaded structures are one design, and you don't get people trying to push the boundaries as much as they would if they were building it themselves.
For a first iteration, I mean, definitely going for the one design arms and the foil cant system, even though it had its issues, it did at least give everyone a good chance of getting a boat on the water which worked without major structural failures in that kind of like carrying arm.
And some of the testing that those foil arms went through on the rigs that you've seen some pictures of, they put them through their paces, and actually I think it proved to be the right decision.
Things like the rig, where it's effectively a one design shape pretty much, but you can build it yourself. I think is good. I mean, it's good for you to be able to build components yourself, in the sense that it creates jobs in the marine sector in your region, and the America's Cup has to have a positive effect on the marine industry as a whole. Otherwise, what's the point, kind of? So I do think it's good that you have the ability to employ boat builders, employ design teams, employ composite guys, work with. And actually, that was quite a nice thing about the foil. It meant you had to effectively involve foundries, like go to a different supply network than you previously would have gone to, where you would have just tooled up some female moulds and made them in composite.
What didn't work for you in terms of the boats? The foil cant system is the first thing that, Ben was complaining about this, and I think this was politics and sports psychology. He was wanting to deflect away from the deficiencies Ineos had, create a kind of a us against the world mentality. But, as all great kind of stories go, there's got to be an element of truth for it to work as kind of that sports psychology exercise. And there were issues. We saw issues with Ineos, we saw issues with American Magic, and we heard about the temperamentality of it and the oil filtering. That's got to be an issue.
I'm sure there were issues, and it's a relatively complicated hydraulic system, so there will be teething issues, and obviously the team who designed it are going to know how to overcome those issues more readily than teams who are picking up the components, installing them, and then figuring out how to work it. So it doesn't surprise me that Team New Zealand had far fewer foil control system issues at the World Series than anyone else. Luna Rossa and Team New Zealand, I don't think had any foil control issues, whereas Ineos and American Magic, who had no involvement in the design of those components, had issues. So it's hardly surprising. And again, we come back to this thing that if there'd been a World Series and the Christmas regatta was the third regatta, then we probably wouldn't have seen any foil control system issues at that point. They'd have all been ironed out. So I think that was all kind of fine. And I mean, I've had people say, well, where do you see the AC75 going? How are we going to see these? Like, do we want to see them going faster next time? And I mean, to my mind, I don't really think we care if they go faster next time. We just want to see tight racing with more teams and them being just as good as they are. I mean, maybe you would say that the boats were a bit marginal down at. They're a bit marginal at the bottom end of their racing wind range, in the sense that the minute you're foiling, you can't afford to have a code 0 up.
For me, I'm a bit conflicted about increasing the range lower down, because I don't think it's only a matter of, it'd be great if they were flying around and still really competitive at 6 knots. The problem with 6 knots is that the wind becomes a lot less stable. So regardless of whether the boats could fly or not, I think you'd still see really wacky racing. And I think that's a lot of why we have lower wind limits of events. It's not that really, sub 5 knots you shouldn't race in. Like if you're doing a club race, you'll do a club race in 5 knots. But for a championship event, you want a stable breeze. You don't want it filling in from all different directions. So I think even if they could get the boats down and flying in those wind directions, I'm still not sure if I want to see a race in it. Now, in Auckland, we had the steady breezes, which were very stable and went down to quite low and they were dropping off, but it was still a relatively stable breeze, and it would have been nice to see them race there. But a Solent kind of 5 knot breeze, I didn't want to see anyone have to race in that. You know what I mean?
No, I don't think they should drop the wind limit. I just think around that limit, the racing is a bit wacky, because there's this huge. If you sail, I mean, we saw Luna Rossa sail into a little bit of a lull, miss attack, and lose 4 kilometres in a race. I mean, I'd be really interested to see what would have got around the course quicker in that massive turnaround race, an AC50 or an AC75. I think an AC50 would have got around the course quicker, because they'd just gone, we'll sail displacement, fly a hull, and still sail around the course at 20 knots, 18 knots. In a way, there's no point in a way discussing CATs versus AC75s, because we're committed to AC75s for 2 cycles. So the question is, could you do anything to make the AC75 better over the wind range? And I mean, no one uses code 0s, so they'll get rid of the bowsprits.
Yeah.
Just because, although it's probably a minor cost, they all designed and built those boats with structure to support the loads associated with code 0s. So that's cost, and it's fairly irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but it's something, so good to remove it. I wonder what they will do with the foil limits, because having the ability to measure in 2 sets of foils, I think might be a good thing.
How would they decide then each day racing? What do you think? How would that work?
Well, I think they just have. I think in the same way they did in Bermuda, you look at the forecasts and you pick your foils.
So not a race committee decision, but a team decision.
A team decision, and if you pick the wrong foils, that's part of the game. And I think that way you might also see a case where weaker teams take wins because they can take a punt on the foils.
No, so I was actually thinking about the box rule itself on the foils, and would it actually be more interesting? Like, the box rule served a purpose, but it really limited what they could do with their foils. And actually, if we were to remove the box rule, and as Rob said, have two sets of foils that they can measure in, I think it could lead to some quite interesting scenarios. And it gives the designers and the structures guys, there's a whole different cycle of engineering challenge that they need to go through to define what the optimum is. Because obviously you might think, oh, we need to go longer and longer, but then that makes it harder to sail, and it would just be.
You just can't engineer them. If you go, I mean, if you want to, you can go, I'll make it as high aspect ratio as possible. Well, it's just not possible. I think the thing, I agree with you. So I think the obvious things they should remove on the foil rule are the boats are not self-righting, so they should get rid of that centre of gravity rule. It's irrelevant. The boats don't go turtle because they got airbags in the top of the main. So do away with that. Then you can make the foils out of whatever you want. You can make them out of composite. And also do away with the symmetry rule.
One thing I'll be interested to see if they tighten up on is some of the loopholes. I don't think it was a particularly well written rule, but there were some clear areas where reading between the lines that wasn't the intention, but it did leave a bit of ambiguity there. Like the deck height, it clearly wasn't the aim of the rule to allow people to put the mast balls on pedestals, but that's what happened. The batwing mains and stuff like that. And I kind of think it's good, it's the job of the teams to find those areas and exploit them, really find the edges of that rule. I'm totally cool with that. But it'll be interesting to see if they close those loopholes up and then what happens to the boats as well, because obviously you've kind of got two classes of boat at the moment in terms of the hull design and the mast placement and stuff like that, which would, if you're buying one of those, Luna Rossa or Ineos's boat, you're at a kind of a bit of an obvious disadvantage there. It'd be interesting to see how they do that. And again, the main sails, that was just a bit of a stupid rule that led to this batwing mains. Like, do we need those area rules? Can that be opened up now to see what people do with the sails? Like, there's stuff like that which I feel could be improved.
I mean, I agree. I think minimum sizes on the sails is pointless. The biggest restriction on sail size at the bottom end is your sail card allowance. So you're not going to waste sail cards on little sails that then, like, you've got to be reasonable with what you do. So yeah, by all means, if you want to make a tiny little sail and then that measure as one of your allotted mainsails, go for it. That's your problem. You've wasted a card. But I just think they should have a maximum size, and that's that. I mean, the real winner out of the America's Cup is North Sails. North Sails have made an absolutely obscene amount of money from three. I mean, they must be thinking firstly, double skin mains. That's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Because you sell 2 mains for every 1 main you previously sold, so that's great. That's a winner. Loads of jibs is great because everyone will buy all the jibs. They must be thinking AC75. Let's get 10 teams in there. We're gonna make so much money off this. It's ridiculous.
They'll recoup all their costs from the wing sail era in just a couple of cups, won't they?
Yeah, and those jibs were tiny.
That's it on the AC75 class. We're going to get another episode up soon looking at the format of the event, how that worked, the dynamics, the racing rules. I think you can see where I'm going to go on complaining about rules, but yeah, get yourself ready for it, and we'll see you back in a couple of days for that. Take care.